What if I told you the iconic image of humanity's greatest achievement, landing on the moon, has a dark and deeply unsettling secret hidden in plain sight? The heroes we celebrate, the brilliant minds behind NASA's triumph, weren't all homegrown American geniuses. Some of them had a past they desperately wanted to forget, a past stained by the horrors of Nazi Germany. This is the uncomfortable, unbelievable, and true story of Operation Paperclip. The year is 1945. World War II is over. The Third Reich lies in ruins, but amidst the rubble, the victorious Allies are scrambling for a different kind of prize. Not gold, not territory, but intellect. Specifically, German scientific and technological knowledge. The Soviets were advancing from the east, the Americans and British from the west, both racing to capture the minds behind Hitler's most fearsome weapons. At the top of that list was the V-2 rocket, the world's first long-range ballistic missile, a terrifying weapon that had rained destruction on London. The architect of the V-2 was a charismatic, ambitious rocket scientist named Wernher von Braun. He and his team had developed this technology at a secret facility called Peenemünde, and later using forced labor from concentration camps in an underground factory called Mittelwerk. Thousands of prisoners died building these rockets. Von Braun knew that as the war ended, his knowledge was his only ticket to survival, and more importantly, to continuing his lifelong dream: space travel. Faced with the choice between the advancing Soviets and the approaching Americans, he made a calculated decision. He and his top scientists surrendered to the United States military. This presented American leaders with a profound moral dilemma. These men were members of the Nazi Party. Some, like von Braun, held ranks in the SS. They had worked within a regime that committed unspeakable atrocities, and their projects were built on the backs of slave laborers. But the Cold War was dawning. The strategic imperative to gain an edge over the Soviet Union was paramount. President Truman authorized a secret program, initially codenamed Operation Overcast, later known as Operation Paperclip. The name came from the simple paperclips attached to the files of the scientists the US government wanted to recruit, discreetly marking them for extraction. To bring them to America, their pasts needed to be sanitized. But the legacy of Operation Paperclip is deeply controversial, sparking fierce ethical debates. On one side, you have the science over justice argument. Proponents believed the knowledge these scientists possessed was so vital, particularly in the burgeoning Cold War, that their pasts could be overlooked. They saw it as a pragmatic choice, prioritizing national security and technological advantage above all else. This was the government's official line, a necessary evil to stay ahead of the Soviet Union, which was aggressively recruiting German experts of its own. On the other side, the opposition was loud and clear. Jewish groups, scientists like Albert Einstein, and prominent public figures were horrified. They argued that giving refuge and high-paying jobs to individuals complicit in the atrocities of the Nazi regime was a profound moral failure. How could the United States, a nation that just fought a war against this ideology, welcome its architects? For many, it was a betrayal of justice and the memory of millions who suffered. Ultimately, this set an unsettling precedent. It raised the disturbing question of whether national interest can justify ignoring war crimes and moral responsibility. The debate forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the compromises made in the name of security and the long shadow they cast over history. Intelligence officials literally rewrote their histories, erasing Nazi affiliations, downplaying their roles in the war machine, and creating new, clean dossiers. Over 1,600 German scientists and technicians were secretly brought to the United States, their families following soon after. They were given new homes, new jobs, and a new life, working for the very country they had been at war with just months earlier. They were set up in places like Fort Bliss, Texas, and Huntsville, Alabama, where they began working on the US Army's rocket programs, essentially continuing the work they had started under Hitler. Publicly, the narrative was one of American ingenuity. But behind the scenes, von Braun and his team were the driving force. They took their V-2 expertise and began designing bigger, more powerful rockets, When the Soviets stunned the world by launching Sputnik in 1957, the space race was officially on, and America was losing. Panic set in. In response, the US government created a new civilian agency to lead its space efforts, NASA. And who was put at the center of it all? Wernher von Braun. He became the director of the new Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, and his German team formed the nucleus of NASA's brain trust. They were tasked with the impossible, putting a man on the moon before the end of the decade. The result was the Saturn V, the most powerful rocket ever built. It was a direct descendant of the V-2 missile. Its chief architect was Wernher von Braun. The Saturn V was a masterpiece of engineering, a towering 363-foot giant that would carry the Apollo astronauts into history. Throughout the 1960s, von Braun became a public figure, a celebrity scientist. He appeared on television, in magazines, and even worked with Walt Disney to promote the dream of space exploration to the American public. He was the friendly, visionary face of the space program, his dark past a carefully guarded secret. On July 20th, 1969, the world held its breath as Neil Armstrong took that one small step. It was a victory for America, a triumph for all mankind. In the mission control centers in Houston and at the launch pads in Florida, former Nazi scientists celebrated alongside their American colleagues. They had helped America win the space race. They had fulfilled their own lifelong ambitions. Wernher von Braun was hailed as a national hero. But the truth of Operation Paperclip is that America's journey to the moon was built upon a profound moral compromise. To defeat one enemy, we embraced the architects of another. We chose to overlook a history of war crimes and slave labor in the name of national security and technological superiority. This isn't to diminish the incredible work of the thousands of American engineers, technicians, and astronauts who made the Apollo program possible. But it is to acknowledge a complex and uncomfortable part of our history. The story of Operation Paperclip forces us to ask difficult questions. Does the end justify the means? Can scientific achievement be separated from the moral character of the scientists? And what secrets are we willing to keep to win? The legacy of Wernher von Braun and his team is twofold. They are simultaneously the minds that gave us one of history's most inspiring moments, and a chilling reminder that the line between hero and villain, and the path of progress itself, is rarely straight and never simple.